Now, Living Faith Fellowship had, and at the time I was there and several years after, this kind of conveyor belt they take every new attendee through. It starts and it has its seasons in cycles. So it starts when the new students from U of I and WSU come in the fall. And it began when LFF would reach out to you and invite you to a Bible study or campus Christian fellowship. This is a fun gathering that happened every Friday night with music and a message. And then LFF had this event a few weeks into the school year that was called Heartbeat Retreat. It was eventually called the Big Weekend. I'm not sure if they still have this now, but it's an event that kind of an overnight trip, or at least it was, where they really want to make sure that you give your heart to Jesus at that particular event or along the way somewhere in the midst of Bible studies, campus Christian fellowship, and so on. So then usually they'll start you off at Going for the Gold, a course that I've already mentioned before. And after a while, there's a course called Mere One, which is a Christian psychology course. They'll want you to take that. And basically, the mission is really reaching out to these first-year students or people who have been started coming to LFF for the first time. And they really want to incorporate as much church activities as possible. And even during the summertime, because a lot of the students, when school was not in session, do go home for the summer, they'll give you a lot of materials to work on. Basically, to keep your walk with Jesus alive is essentially what the mission was. And so after your first year, you can join an organization known as the JCDs. That's what it was known by back then. I have no idea if they still have this group. But essentially that stood for Joshua, Caleb, and Deborah Company. They were biblical figures who had a lot of military experience, very famous at taking the land, which was a very big theme for Christianity in the mid-90s. Or at least it was a big theme in Living Faith Fellowship back then. Maybe it was, who knows. Anyway, so the JCs had this nautical Navy theme. We had these blue shirts and wore these sailor hats. And at the end of the summer, it would take place the week just before spring starts, WSU and U of I start. It was done at this hotel. It was a retreat, JC retreat, and we would meet up in rooms for a lot of learning and teaching, worship, and a lot of fellowship. And of course, once school started, the JCDs were essentially tasked with trying to get as many new people to attend Living Faith Fellowship as possible. And as a JCD, you would be assigned certain people to reach out to. In fact, at the time, there was a system of doing this. While the senior pastor, Pastor Carl, would be preaching, usually every Sunday, the other pastors would be sitting in back, checking out who was new to the church. Now, during the service, they would pass these notes to JCD company members in order to reach out with them afterward. And yes, I took part in this. There was a time where I was given one of these greeter slips, that's what they call them, and I was supposed to fill out how the encounter went with this person. Now, unfortunately, I lost a slip somewhere and went crazy trying to find it. That was just one instance. But because after all, it was the JCs made it pretty clear that we were supposed to keep some kind of secrecy about these types of evangelism practices. Now, I've said before, I don't think this practice is done anymore. In fact, but the fact that it was done kind of shows what Living Faith Fellowship had become by the time I joined. I hope that other churches don't do this. I think it's one thing when churches encourage their congregation to reach out to someone new, but it's another thing when there's a system to ensure that it is done. Now, it can be argued that some businesses probably do a lot of certain practices like this, but I don't know, something is just crossing a line here. Now, I will have to admit that most of my memories of Living Faith Fellowship while I was in college were, for the most part, very pleasant. It was nice to have a lot of friends who believed what you believe while working together for a common goal. And the best part is that I didn't feel like there was anyone in the LFF group who was better than the others. I kind of felt like I was pretty welcome amongst pretty much all my friends at the JCEs. I could go up and talk to pretty much anybody. It wasn't like, say, like in high school where there's like certain cliques and you have to be a part of that clique. I really felt like we were all one clique at Living Faith Fellowship. That's one thing I kind of like about it, honestly. Unfortunately, there was a dark side to this, and I was doing my best to ignore it. Because, like I said, every year brought in new students. Living Faith Fellowship would do its best to harvest, that's their word, not mine, the people from it. And generally we'd have a lot of people going to Our Favorite Seats / Big Weekend, that event, and then a lot of people going for the gold. That is probably only a few, probably less than half would actually stay in going for the gold. Which means you'd have a lot of good friends you'd meet from the beginning of the year, and then you just wouldn't see them after that. They would just kind of drop off. And it's kind of sad. I guess they left for whatever reasons. The fact that it was had such a high turnover rate, I don't even know what that even says. I'm gonna let that fact seep in, and you can decide how you want to interpret that. But that did happen. But at the time, I thought I had found something just really great, and I thought I even found something just perfect. But there was LFF was far from perfect. In fact, several things just showed how really imperfect it was. Just to demonstrate, I'm going to talk about what a typical week was at Living Faith Fellowship when I was in college. Okay, at Sunday, that was a pretty busy day. There was church in the morning with a class, then the service, and then the church wanted you to reach out after the service to people. And as a JCD, you were given a host family, so you could take a new person over for lunch. And then after that, there was usually an evening meeting of some kind. At the time, we had these groups called home care groups. These were just separate divisions within the church with separate leaders. And and those would last like 3 hours a night, and they would often go pretty late. So Sunday was pretty much booked as far as that was concerned. Then on Monday, possibly Tuesday, there was usually a Bible study, and the Bible study involves a lot of prep time and a lot of getting together with people, and hopefully going late because we wanted to really minister and give outreach to these people. Tuesday, I remember that it was always being like a class for me. I had this one class called Personal Evangelism, and then another one called Spirit-Led Evangelism, which, were, of course, outreach focused. And, Wednesday, that was when the church would have an evening service, because there were 2 services per week. And, of course, you're encouraged to bring as many people as you can to that, and that had baptisms, and that could go late depending on the spot. Thursday was, I have to admit, they really tried to schedule no church events on that night, even though sometimes they did happen, but usually it was what they called family night, and most people would just collapse that night and usually just watch a movie or something, even though they didn't want their home care leaders to know about that. And then during college, there was Campus Christian Fellowship, big night on Friday night, still happens, I'm told. It often goes pretty late. I can go later if you're trying to lead someone to the Lord, and usually it would end very late for me, and there's usually some sort of after party after that. So then on Saturday, everybody would come to the church at 8 in the morning because there were Saturday morning crews. I'm told these aren't really done anymore, but usually, that was from 8 to 12, and you did help out. I helped on a custodial crew where you just pretty much cleaned up the thing. It was a good way for the church to save on janitorial labor, but it did bring a lot of people together. And there was also usually like JCD meetings sometimes, and something was usually going on Saturday. So that was my week during college. I did all this while attending WSU. This was done without pay, always on a volunteer basis for the most part. I pretty much did all that. So yes, I own up to the fact that even though this organization made kind of unrealistic demands on its followers, I did go along with it. So that's on me. And to make things even more busy, everyone at LFF was usually encouraged to take time out of their busy day to do the homework for the classes they were going to, and then also, of course, prayer and reading the Bible every day. So that's like at least, I don't know, that was quite a big chunk of time out of the day, as I recall. So yeah, those were pretty busy days. I don't really remember much from college except church and school. That's about it. Now, I probably should have talked about this earlier, but this is the first time I've really mentioned the original founders of Living Faith Fellowship, Pastors Carl and Sherry Bart. I honestly believe that Carl and his wife Sherry wanted to do the best they could to help people. Kind of come out of that Jesus movement that happened in the late 60s, early 70s. I was kind of got that vibe when I saw the photos of the first building being built. The first building being, pointing to but there's a brown building behind this big thing right here that you see in the back. That was the first building. Talk about this newer building a little bit. Now, I think that perhaps he began to believe that he could help as many people as possible. So he set up leaders underneath him, and then he set up leaders underneath them. It wasn't long before they built that building back there and established a school for their children and their followers' children. Now, Karl Barton had a model that a lot of religious leaders have, where they basically say that we're doing the Christianity the way Jesus wanted it done and follow the Bible only. It was pretty clear that he and his wife somehow became kind of the parents of the place, to the point that Pastor Scher herself was often referred to as Mama. Yeah, they were pretty charismatic. They followed as much of the precepts of the charismatic movement of Christianity. They also had kind of that chemistry that you see in a lot of church leaders, where the husband is the head pastor and deals with the day-to-day operations and the teaching and stuff like that. Well, the pastor's wife is focused on women's ministry and stuff like that. Pastor Karl always seemed to be the one who came off a bit stern, emphasizing the right teaching. His wife kind of came across as a very sweet and happy kind of people person most of the time. One thing that attracted me to Living Faith Fellowship was the way that Pastor Karl and Sherry really had this belief that you could hear from God. In fact, Sherry had this intriguing method of using a 4-color pen. She believed that you could write in blue to pour your heart out to Jesus, and then red for what God is saying in return. I kind of forget what the other 2 colors were, but I find it interesting that how this thing that she did was encouraged to be imitated, and practically every LFF attendee was copying this method of prayer and spending time with Jesus. And I find it also very interesting how for a class that was about learning about the Bible and hearing from God, the pastors never really revealed how to do this. Like I said, I still believe in God, but it's one thing to say that, and it's another thing to say, like, I know exactly what God is saying right now because I hear him. I bring this up because a system like this creates more doubt than it actually does security and certainty. I think essentially it was creating an atmosphere where we thought God was saying something to us, which creates some problems if they don't have any back-of-the-book type answer key to make sure everybody is hearing correctly. I mean, if you think you can hear from God, then God will probably want you to do things that are in the Bible, of course. So you'll start to do things like give up on certain things that will distract you from church and adopt a constant system of self-improvement. That's all well and good, but when it comes to making plans for your life and you don't hear what God is saying, that is a scary place to be. And one of the doctrines that Going for the Gold taught was that if you're hearing from your direction from God, your plan, your purpose, it will be confirmed by your leadership. So yeah, this type of system, if implemented, can essentially make the church and its leadership God. And I'm sure there was a lot of people who heard from God but were stopped by leadership. In some cases, they probably did their job well. But the issue is eventually for a system that says like, hey, we're allowing everybody to hear from God and we're totally breaking ourselves out of the box that way, you're still putting yourself in a box because it's like, yeah, but the leadership is going to be the one who makes the final decision and stuff like that. And if you don't like that, you can just leave. Yeah, that's kind of the issue here. Another issue at Living Faith Fellowship is you eventually start hearing the same things over and over. They're kind of echo chambers that keep you there with some promise of good things happening in the next life or eventually in the future. Since most of Living Faith Fellowship's ministry was and probably devoted to college-age kids, the audience was constantly changing. So the more I stuck around, most of what I heard in the messages wasn't really anything new. It was all kind of targeted for the new person here. This is especially true at CCF, where we essentially did the same topics every year for that. And I've spoken about how I used to write skits for that. And yeah, so after a while and being on the leadership team there, I eventually just heard the same things over and over. Anyway, like I said, the Living Faith Fellowship message was always constantly adding new members. And this is why Karl wanted to create kind of this mega church here in Pullman, Washington. And he got constructed on a building that could seat about 1,000 people. It's the same one you're seeing behind me. Now during this time, this was in 1995 or so, when this building was being constructed, there was a lot of negative media attention toward Living Faith Fellowship. It was on the front page of the Moscow Pullman Daily News once, and the local news in Spokane, a very big city close to Pullman, Washington, about 70 miles away, ran TV coverage of doubtful Living Faith Fellowship practices. fact, if you do a search on Living Faith Fellowship on Google, you're going to see articles from that time discussing this. But by that time, I was pretty much in the evangelism program at Living Faith Fellowship, and I heard that they had changed a lot of their tactics in response. So maybe the greater slip thing got abolished, who knows. But during that time, it was pretty clear the leadership of Living Faith Fellowship was worried, and they focused on making certain that followers didn't feel like they were in a cult, which is what the opposition at the time called it. And most LFF followers were quite busy working on the new building, honestly. And it was something that really kind of brought us all together. I actually have very good memories from this time, even though it was busy as heck. And that was the first year I got out of college, and I just started an 8-to-5 job. So yeah, I was like working pretty much 12-hour days, honestly. I remember really giving a lot, going to bed super tired, felt like I was part of something great, and so I wasn't really listening to the naysayers at the time. I really thought that, in fact, a lot of people in Living Faith Fellowship called it the persecution, even though it wasn't really like that. It was just a bunch of people who were just saying, telling truth stories about Living Faith Fellowship and what they were doing back then. Kind of like I'm doing what I'm doing now. Anyway, so this new building opened in 1995, and I'm pretty certain that the only time the second level has been filled is when we had a concert. And I would like to say that Pastor Carl was not really motivated by money so much when it came to the expansion of Living Faith Fellowship. But generally, if you want to do something as big as this, you need money. And you see a lot of preachers like Joel Osteen or Kenneth Copeland who have massive mansions and private jets. And you can't help but think that is the model Jesus laid out for his life. It's not really that way. I feel like it's somehow that kind of megachurch pastor mentality is very skewed from the actual gospel of Jesus. Now, I always thought Pastor Carl and his wife were pretty wealthy, but most of that probably had to do with Pastor Carl's job because he was a dentist before he became a pastor. I figured he just invested his money well. I hope he didn't pay for his moderately big house on money from followers who really couldn't afford houses themselves because they were giving a lot to the church. Yeah, I wasn't really certain where I was going to drop this, but something that's been bothering me for a while, and I'm going to say this now. Pastor Carl and Sherry would often have get-togethers in their house, which is somewhat lavish. And I always find it odd that he had this kind of a pool at the bottom, which served for the baptisms at the time before the new building was constructed. And so he had on the top floor, he had this kind of gate around, so some people from the first floor could look down to the second, to the basement level, I guess, to see the baptisms. So there was like this kind of iron gate around this thing. And here's the thing, on the bars of this gate, the initials KB, Carl Barton, were put repeatedly. Now, I don't know what kind of person does that. If he had built that gate and wanted to do that, I guess that's okay, but I think there's a certain level of vanity that shows about you. Like, for example, if I put the initials of GC on stuff, okay, Flynn, I just did that now on my shirt, but if I put my initials MR on stuff like that, like on a gate to my house or my front doors, I think that just says something about me, something negative, honestly. I'm just going to allow you to decide what that says. So, and also, if his followers made that gate for him, and they were the ones that put the KB, that also says something about him and the followers. So I'm just going to let that lie there. There was also a time that the place, this brown building that we have, the original building, had a wall that said memorable quotes of Pastor Carl. And there were like sheets of paper that you could actually buy at the Shiloh Christian Bookstore, which also is there. I don't know if it's still there. And a lot of the quotes were a lot of cringe, but some of them were actually pretty good. One of the worst ones, though, and I think the worst, it was like, if you want to change from bitter to better, turn the I to E, as in apostrophe E, like he, like God. So change from yourself to God. It's terrible, okay? It's a lot of cringe. It's not even worth putting on a sheet of paper. But here's the thing, it's like he would say stuff like that and he would get the audience to just go, oh yeah, that's great. You know, he would just kind of get that. Pastor Carl was like that. Another one of these posters said something like, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. And on this poster, it attributed this quote to Coach Landry and Pastor Carl. Now, I could be wrong about it being Tom Landry, but he did have a lot of inspirational sports quotes. For some reason, I remember Landry's name on this poster. I could be wrong. Wikipedia attributes this quote to Bruins coach Henry Russell Red Sanders. But even if this is cited right, how is it that two men are saying this quote at the same time? Are they just saying it at the same time? It's like, okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3. Winning is the. I mean, can you imagine how this goes? It's like you can't take somebody else's quote and say that it's yours. You can't do that. But yeah, Pastor Carl and Sherry, they were like that. People really loved them. There are times when the followers of LFF would put on shows to appreciate the pastors. I really hope these shows were in fact done without any prompting from the leadership themselves. Because that would be terrible if they were. And I'm pretty sure these celebrations are all on video, and it's usually at these little song and dance numbers in a kind of a variety show act. And because at the time, Living Faith Fellowship was very good at putting on artsy, schmartsy music and musical theater type shows. They're really good at that. I'm sure there's some box somewhere with VHS tapes with all these shows on tape, but oh man, there must be so much cringe. Yeah, cringe is probably a good word to just how I feel about some of the things that I did for the church back then. What I said, I really enjoyed my time there. Some of the things that I think of what I did then just came across as downright goofy. You know, some people like regret their youth, like sex and drugs or something like that. My regrets involve some of the goofy things I did for Living Faith Fellowship. Still, I chose it, gonna own up to it, did it. Okay, I got off the subject there. Getting back to how this building was constructed. This would be a good time to discuss the teaching on tithing, a lesson that is very late in going for the gold. With the application of a few scriptures, mainly from the Old Testament, Pastor Carl calculated that people should tithe 10%, then another 10%, and then some kind of like 3 1/3%. So that's like 23 1/3%. And this is before taxes. So at the point that was the policy, and I can't say that each church member was actually giving, what that'd be like 1/4 of their income before taxes. And this was, you know, and I did this for a little while, and then I became like a full-time freelance writer, and I got very heavy into poverty. I couldn't give it anymore. No one called me to say, hey Mark, how come you're not giving? And no one really did anything like that. So if you want to say that Living Faith Fellowship is not a cult, they got that going for them. So there must have been a lot of members of Living Faith Fellowship that were making a lot of money to support this church. And hey, you know, and that's great if they did. And you can kind of make yourself a good living here in this town of Pullman, Washington, and get a university job, and you can probably make your housing payment sometime. There were members of the leadership, home care leaders, that were still living in trailers, though. So that's kind of indicative of the problems here. Speaking of trailers, about a few decades ago, there was a trailer park here at the location where Living Faith Fellowship was. And I have no idea if these people were forcibly evicted from their homes. And I have to admit, I did not think of that while I was working on the building when we were cleaning up a lot of these leftover trailers there. I really hope that wasn't the case. I know that somebody probably knows the whole story behind this. If you want to leave a comment, feel free. Anyway, like I said, Pastor Carl and Sherry, they wanted to be the next mega church. And I'm actually quite glad they didn't get their wish. It's pretty clear that the leadership of LFF looked forward to a time of revival where churches would be filled with those hungry for the gospel, and sure, this would fill up the building quite fast, and I think that was the basic plan here that would happen. And it's pretty clear Pastors Carl and Sherry were models of successful businessmen, you know, the type that don't really do very little, but they just tell the people underneath them to do things. I'm not saying they're lazy, but oftentimes their focus of work is elsewhere, and they work as finding other work for people who work underneath them. Now the problem is that they were making people underneath them work so very hard, and there's really only so much you can do if you don't get the returns that you originally projected. I mean, filling up a building like this with thousands of people, when really we were only getting a few converts each year, man, that was something to ask for. And now, in most of the discussions of questionable church leadership, very little is devoted to those who follow them. Personally, there are people that I consider true Christians who practice serving their leaders but really don't need to shoulder a cross that has already been done for by Jesus 2,000 years ago. I have a lot that I can name that really put a lot of hard work into this building and really put a lot of hard work into actually serving and loving people. And I'm not certain if they want to be mentioned here because maybe they don't want to be associated with a video like this.